Romania, the country of castles and vampires, right? Well, before we get to that, and don't worry, let's go back to the very beginning. Because as it turns out, Romania's story doesn't start with Dracula. It actually starts with a people so fierce, the famous Greek historian Herodotus once called them the bravest and most upright of all the tribes he'd ever encountered. Is that true? That's what we're here to find out. Everyone, meet the Dacians. They thrived in and around the Carpathian Mountains, building a powerful civilization that traded with the Greeks and mined its own rich mountains of gold and silver. By the 1st century BC, their king, Burebista, had united the tribes into a kingdom powerful enough to make Julius Caesar a little nervous. Actually, Caesar was actively planning a massive invasion of Dacia, but in a wild twist of historical fate, before that could happen, he got assassinated. And funnily enough, Burebista was assassinated by his own people in the exact same year. So that showdown didn't really push through, though Rome didn't really forget that plan. That's why in 106 AD, Emperor Trajan marched in with his legions and finally defeated the last Dacian king, Decibel, who, interestingly, chose to kill himself rather than be paraded through Rome in chains. And then Trajan claimed Dacia as a Roman province. What followed after that was about 150 years of Roman rule, which was just long enough for the Latin language to take permanent root. Eventually, Rome pulled out around 271 AD. That's when things got messy. Because for the next several centuries, wave after wave of migrating peoples came tearing through. Goths, Huns, Slavs, Avars, Bulgars. While each one of them technically left their mark, none of them stayed quite long enough to completely erase the local culture. So through all of it, the descendants of the Dacians and Romans held on, meaning they kept their Latin-based language, eventually adopted Orthodox Christianity, and slowly organised themselves into 3 distinct principalities. You've got Wallachia in the south, Moldavia in the northeast, and Transylvania in the west. Now I'm warning you, it's going to be complicated from here on out, so you've got to pay extra attention. Ready? See, these 3 regions didn't just develop separately, they also developed under different rulers. On one hand, Transylvania spent centuries under Hungarian rule, and later Habsburg control. On the other, Moldavia and Wallachia were constantly fending off the rapidly expanding Ottoman Empire. And for a brief, almost miraculous moment in 1600, a Wallachian prince named Michael the Brave actually managed to unify all 3 principalities under one rule, which sadly lasted exactly 1 year before the neighbouring empires crushed it. It was good while it lasted. But speaking of the Ottomans, this was the brutal era that produced the man the whole world turned into a fictional vampire. Now we're getting to the fun part. His name was Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, though you probably know him as Vlad the Impaler. Contrary to popular belief, he wasn't undead. He didn't drink blood either, and he definitely wasn't charming any maidens in a gothic ballroom. What he was ruthless. He famously had thousands of captured Ottoman soldiers impaled on wooden stakes outside his fortress. Hence the nickname. But the thing is, the Ottomans, they weren't strangers to violence, yet even they were reportedly horrified by the psychological warfare of his stake-lined fields. Which is probably why a few centuries later, Irish author Bram Stoker borrowed Vlad's family name, Dracula, for his 1897 Gothic horror novel, and the rest, as they say, is pop culture history. By the mid-1800s, something completely different was happening. Nationalism was spreading across Europe, and Romanians, exhausted from centuries of being carved up by foreign powers, began pushing for unity. So in 1859, Alexandru Ioan Cuza was elected Prince of both Wallachia and Moldavia. 3 years later, they formally merged into a single state called Romania. In 1877, Romania declared full independence from the Ottoman Empire, and by 1881, the Kingdom of Romania was officially born. Then came the World Wars. Romania entered World War I in 1916 on the side of the Allies, mainly to reclaim Transylvania from Austro-Hungarian rule. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was definitely a disaster at first. The capital, Bucharest, fell within months. Over 300,000 soldiers died, and hundreds of thousands of civilians were lost, many to a devastating typhus epidemic. Still, Romania survived, and when the dust settled in 1918, it came out of the war inheriting Transylvania, Bessarabia, and Bukovina. which, if you add that to Wallachia and Moldavia, meant the country literally doubled in size. The Romanians called it the Great Unification, and by all accounts it was a pretty historic moment. Sadly, it wasn't all smooth sailing after that, because shortly after, World War II happened. And it was less kind, if you can imagine that. Romania initially entered the war on Germany's side, but then switched to the Allies in 1944 in a dramatic coup. It was a move that historians credit with shortening the war by as much as 6 months. But in the larger scheme of geopolitical things, it didn't save them, because the post-war Yalta Agreement essentially handed Romania into the Soviet sphere of influence. And by 1947, King Michael was forced to abdicate at gunpoint. That's when a rigid communist government took over. So for the next 4 decades, Romania lived under tight control, culminating in one of the most repressive regimes in the Eastern Bloc, Nicolae Ceausescu. The man built himself a palace so staggeringly large, it remains the second biggest administrative building in the world today. Meanwhile, his people waited in agonizingly long lines, just for bread. Sound familiar? Brings back memories of the reign of terror from the French Revolution, doesn't it? Well, as you can probably guess, the ending was pretty similar too. Because in December 1989, the people had finally had enough. Protests that started in the city of Timișoara exploded into a national uprising. Ceausescu tried to flee, but he was caught, tried in a swift military tribunal, and finally executed on Christmas Day alongside his wife, Elena. To cement the end of the regime, the whole thing was broadcast on Romanian television. So on December 26th, Romania woke up without a dictator for the first time in 42 years. And maybe you're thinking, it probably went downhill from there. Like the country probably looks beaten up, scarred or worn down. But surprisingly enough, it doesn't. Romania sits almost exactly halfway between the equator and the North Pole, right at the crossroads of Central, Eastern and Southern Europe. It covers about 238,000 square kilometres, which is roughly 92,000 square miles, though the land itself isn't as homogeneous as you might think. It's actually split into almost perfect thirds: mountains, hills and plains. Yeah, let's get into that, shall we? So the spine of the country is the Carpathian Mountains. It's not quite like the Alps, but it still spans over 1,000 kilometres, or about 620 miles. Within these mountains, you'll find 3 major ranges: the Eastern Carpathians, the Southern Carpathians, sometimes called the Transylvanian Alps, and then the Western Carpathians. Pretty straightforward on the names, so they're easy to remember. The highest point here is the Muldu Văchnul Peak at 2,544 metres, or about 8,346 feet. And if you're up for an adventure, during winter, towns like Poiahnu Brașov and Sianaia fill up with skiers. In the summer, the same mountains draw hikers, climbers, and anyone willing to paddle down a river gorge. But cradled inside that arc of mountains sits the Transylvanian Plateau. These are rolling hills, fertile farmland, and old Saxon towns complete with fortified medieval churches. Then on the opposite end of the country, where the land flattens out and meets the Black Sea, you'll find the ends of the Danube River. And when I say ends, I mean there's not just one single point where the river stops. It actually splits into 3 massive branches and spreads out into one of the most remarkable ecosystems on the planet, the Danube Delta. Maybe you've heard of it, but if you haven't, it's a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, one of the most biodiverse regions in all of Europe. And the wild part is, it's still actively growing every year. So while we're talking about rivers, here's a fun detail for you. Almost every single river in Romania starts up in the Carpathians and eventually finds its way down to the Danube, which traces much of the country's southern border with Bulgaria and Serbia, before emptying into that delta we just talked about. Now, if you're wondering what the main port city is here, that's going to be Constanța. It sits right on the Black Sea and connects directly to the Danube by a major canal. It's actually the largest and busiest port on the entire Black Sea. But rivers are not the only main characters in this country, because there are actually around 3,500 lakes in Romania. That includes glacial ones tucked high into the Carpathian Ranges, a volcanic crater lake whose rainwater-fed pool is so pure its mineral content is almost as low as distilled water, and a famous red-hued lake formed by a massive landslide back in 1837. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Honestly, I can ramble on and on about the wonders of Romania's nature, but I wouldn't want to bore you. So I've linked flight details, hotel stays, and heritage cruises down in the description. That way you can see these landscapes for yourself, instead of just listening to me talk your ears off about them. Though one thing I will talk about is their economy. Now, I'm not trying to turn this into a lecture, but I want to give you an overview of what we're dealing with here. Economically, that is. After joining NATO in 2004 and the European Union in 2007, it seemed like things were looking promising. The 2000s brought real growth and foreign investment poured in. The IT sector even started punching way above its weight. Because of that, Romania transformed into one of the most dynamic tech and software hubs in all of Central and Eastern Europe. On top of that, cities modernised and a brand new middle class started to form. But things weren't perfect. They rarely are when it comes to money. See, right now the Romanian economy is hitting a bit of a rough patch. Their GDP actually contracted by 1.7% in the first quarter of the year compared to the same period last year. Doesn't seem like a massive drop, I know, but that actually follows a contraction at the end of last year, which was the sharpest quarterly drop the country had seen since 2012. If you exclude the pandemic years, of course. So, on a bigger picture, the full-year growth came in at just 0.7%, dragged down by sluggishness in construction, tech and agriculture, while trade, transport and industry contributed almost nothing. That's why economists can't quite agree on what the rest of the year will look like for Romania. The World Bank is forecasting 0.5% growth. The IMF says 0.7%. And the European Commission is slightly more optimistic at 1.1%. But despite those slight differences, they all agree on one thing. Romania's GDP growth is not going to be a big one, which, if you think about it, could be an issue, especially since they're also dealing with a massive inflation problem. Annual inflation hit a staggering 10.7% this past April, and if we bring that number down to everyone's day-to-day life, it looks something like this. Rents jumped 33% in a single month. Airline tickets went up 27% around Easter. Coffee is up nearly 22% year on year. And electricity prices are up over 54%. Basically, the wallet is feeling the squeeze. Going out for a coffee, paying the electric bill, or trying to move into a new apartment is costing significantly more than it did just a year ago. It's classic stagflation. Prices go up, but the overall economic engine is just idling. But here's the thing about Romanians, they are nothing if not resilient. Yes, things are getting expensive, but that's not slowing the people down from living life, enjoying their traditions and keeping their vibrant spirit alive. From its language to its religion, to its festivals and other traditions, everything seemed to be intact, just with minor tweaks here and there. Like for instance, Romanian is still a Latin-based language. It's the only major Romance language spoken in Eastern Europe, actually, and it's remarkably survived there ever since Rome pulled its official administration out in 271 AD, the same with their religion. The Christian faith has been deeply woven into daily life here since as early as the 4th century, eventually shaping the profound Eastern Orthodox identity the country holds today. Which means it didn't disappear even under the aggressive, anti-religious push of communism. Then there's the folk traditions like the intricate embroidery, the masterwood carvings, the energetic dances, the seasonal festivals. All of them are still very much alive and practiced to this day. In fact, on March 1st, Romanians celebrate Mărți Șor. This is a beautiful, centuries-old custom that involves exchanging small charms tied with a red and white string as a token of spring's return. In winter, Christmas isn't just about quiet carols and church. It's also about communities dressing up in animal masks, carrying wooden staffs, and dancing through the streets to make enough noise to chase out evil spirits. Though it's a tradition that actually predates Christianity entirely, somehow it got folded into the modern holidays anyway, which, if you ask me, makes the season even better. But why wait for big calendar celebrations? You can experience Romania's deep, multi-layered identity any day of the week through its food. And if you don't know where to begin, let me help you out with that. Sarmale are delicious cabbage rolls filled with minced pork and rice. Though the concept originally came out of Ottoman cuisine, Romanians completely made it their own over the centuries. Muhmuligu is a hearty polenta made from cornmeal. Funnily enough, it was historically considered strict peasant food, but it proudly made its way up the ranks to become a national staple. And then there's tsuiku. It's a potent plum brandy traditionally served at the very start of meals. It is a beverage, sure, but it's less of a casual drink and more of a mandatory hospitality, formality. So whatever you do, don't refuse it when it's offered to you. That's Romania in a nutshell. An old, resilient country in Europe that somehow, through centuries of foreign invasions, a brutal dictatorship, and a revolution that ended on Christmas Day, still knows exactly how to hold on to its own unique identity. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you're going to love this next one.